In this video, we discuss the 5 biggest money problems of a 60-year-old, according to a recent survey. Coming up next on Holy Schmidt.
Holy Schmidt!
I was doing some research for another video, and I came upon a survey conducted by Incurring Advisor. What was interesting about this survey is that it asked questions that many people think about, but don't generally ask, at least in a survey format. These questions are not the type of questions you'd find on the Federal Reserve Board Survey of Consumer Finances or the U.S. Census Bureau survey, for example. If a survey is going to be meaningful to track trends, you have to ask the same questions, and you have to ask them in a format that is quantifiable, meaning they usually need a dollar sign attached to them. But what these mega surveys fail to track is a subset of the general population, at least a micro subset, which is what we're talking about here today, people in and around 60. And more importantly, those surveys don't track how someone feels about a particular situation. This is where the Caring Advisor survey came into play. The survey asked a lot of questions that weren't relevant to the 5 biggest money problems that we're discussing now, but they did have the right subset, and many of the questions did in fact fall into the category of what we're talking about. By the way, down here on the board, I have the URL for the free retirement ready checklist. It's something that I've had available to people who watch this channel now for about a year. I'm going to be taking this down, I'd say within the next month or so, not because it's not useful, it's extremely useful, but I do have something that I think you'll like at least as much, maybe even better. But you can have both. So go to holyschmidt.com/checklist to get your free retirement ready checklist today. All right, let's get into it. Problem number 1 is what most retirees think about when they think about money problems at age 60. And that is that they have undersaved for retirement. 35.9% of the survey respondents say that they have undersaved. Now, before you say, that seems kind of low, I'm in that category, don't worry, there's what I call a selection bias in any survey, which means that the survey taker has an interest in the subject matter. I can tell you that of those that haven't saved for retirement, there's a very good portion of them that haven't given it a lot of thought, and they won't give it a lot of thought until they reach retirement age. So if you are in that category, you're definitely not alone. More importantly, we're going to talk about a few things that can help you in just a minute. Let's talk a moment about the 80% rule, the heuristic that says when you go into retirement, you should have a cash flow stream into the future that represents about 80% of your pre-retirement income. Many of you have 80% into retirement, but many of you do not. So let's talk about what this means. The 80% rule has a bias towards those that are of lower income. If someone like Jeff Bezos went into retirement, and for those of you who don't know Jeff Bezos, he was the former CEO of Amazon.com. He sells $1 billion worth of shares annually to fund his projects. Lives a pretty nice lifestyle. If he went into retirement tomorrow, he would not need 80% of his annual compensation to live. He wouldn't need even 1/10 of that. My guess is, realistically, he would not need 1/100th of that. On the flip side, if someone was living in poverty or below the poverty line, they'd need more than 80% of their annual take-home pay, because if they didn't have that, they couldn't pay the bills. So you have 2 ends of the spectrum, very poor, very rich. Somewhere in between is the point where most people watching this video sit, probably closer to the middle income segment of the population. So the 80% rule is completely individualized. So if you're age 60, looking out at your future, and at age 62, for example, you say that's the year I want to retire, but you look at your cash flow, a combination of Social Security, your 401k, pensions, etc., and you say that just doesn't work. Well, for every year that you wait to retire, that's an extra year in retirement savings that you have not spent. So you're adding a year onto the back end. So simply by postponing retirement a year or 2 or 3, you get back a year or 2 or 3 when it really counts. But you say, Jeff, I am done with my job at age 62. A lot of people feel that way. A lot of people like their jobs and they want to continue as long as they can, but other people want out. And if that's you at age 62, your second option is to reduce the spend in retirement by having part-time income. Part-time income will allow you to do things a little bit differently. It may allow you to postpone taking Social Security and build a bigger Social Security payment. It may allow you to draw down less on your 401k. Postpone taking your pension if you have a pension, or at least take a reduced amount from your pension, if that's one of the options that your pension plan provider offers. The point is, a little extra income goes a long way when it comes to retirement. Problem number 2, very common, you are supporting your children or your grandchildren in many cases. By the way, this is such a big one. No one wants to see a loved one suffer, and 14.9% of the people who took the survey are in fact supporting one or more family members. Let's start off by saying we're not talking about someone who can't help themselves. If that's you, there are social programs available that you should make sure that you're optimizing, and you should definitely talk with a qualified financial planner about your options. But assuming the person on the other end is able to work, they just have not worked, let's talk about the reality of the situation. Right now in the United States, the U.S. is running at just under 4% unemployment. Employers can't find people to fill jobs. That means that there is a job out there somewhere for just about everybody, whether it's driving an Uber or it is working in a manufacturing facility. The fact is, there's the great resignation, as they call it, going on, and so employers can't find people. Now, what does this mean, and how do you move the situation forward? Well, the first thing you need to do is have an honest discussion with the person to whom you're funding. For them, they may just not know that you can't afford what you're doing now indefinitely. You have the resources today, you want to help a loved one today, and so having that discussion with them early is probably the best thing you can do for them, because when you get to DEFCON 5 and you just can't afford your bills and you have to cut it off all of a sudden, things will be much worse for them. It's easy to just go one more month and then one more month. And then after 12 months of going one more month, it's easy to do one more quarter. What's another quarter? And then after another quarter and another year, it's easy to do 3 to 6 more months. I've seen it happen. It is a very bad cycle for someone because it becomes an entitlement and you can't get rid of it without having the discussion. So have a real conversation. You'd be surprised at how receptive they are. Now, what do you say? Well, that's entirely up to you. My recommendation is to help them ease out of the situation. Don't cut them off tomorrow. Give them a date in the future where you're going to slowly start to remove the support, and then remove it 1 month at a time, make it lower and lower to the point where they're going to have no choice but to find work. They will feel it a little in the first month. They'll start to feel it a lot more in months 2, 3, 4, and 5, of course. Problem number 3 is helping others outside of your family with financial support. What I'm talking about generally is charities. Charities are good for the soul. Many of you have heard me say that I donate all of the profits from my book, The Busy Adult's Guide to Making College Happen, to single mother scholarships. But if you were to say to a charity, I want to keep giving you this amount of money, but to be candid, it's going to put me into financial hardship, the charity should say to you, well, let's not talk about that number. Let's talk about a smaller number, or maybe it's time for you to take a break and come back when you're on better financial footing. By the way, if the charity you're talking to doesn't understand this, it's probably the wrong charity for you to be giving your money to anyway. Problem number 4 is taking out or incurring debt without understanding the impact on your future cash flow. And to be completely clear on this point, almost always, this is credit card debt. And this problem exists with 10.9% of the people at age 60, according to the survey. A lot of people, a lot of affluent people, in fact, are guilty of this. They put a large amount on their credit card, and at the end of a certain period of time, they expect to pay it off. 3 of the biggest categories, by the way, are vacations, tuition for a child or a grandchild, and medical bills. So how much would a $10,000 charge on your credit card cost you at 21%? Well, the minimum payment, according to bankrate.com, is $275. This is your interest charge plus 1%. That's what a lot of credit card companies expect for their minimum payment. Now, how much would $275 do to your cash flow if you're in retirement? Well, it would become a big number if you did it 2 or 3 times. For many of you, it would be a big number if you did it once. If the minimum payment is the interest charge for the month plus 1% of the principal amount, this means that you have 99% to go. For those of you that are already in debt and you want to learn how to get out of credit card debt quickly, I'll put a link in the description to a video I recorded. It is the absolute fastest way to pay off your credit card debt, in fact, all of your debt. Problem number 5, not knowing what your future expenses are going to look like when you retire. 8% of the respondents at age 60 had no idea what their cash flow was going to look like, what they had to pay out once they went into retirement. They hadn't done the work to shore up what their Social Security payment was going to be at different ages, what their 401k drawdown might look like, if they have a pension, what the cash flow from their pension might look like. None of it. And on the flip side, they didn't determine what their fixed and variable costs were going to be in retirement. My guess is that most had heard about the 80% rule. It's a pretty common rule, but they didn't know how it applied to them and what their inputs and outputs were going to look like, and if they were going to hit the 80% number. If this is you and you don't know what your inputs and your outputs are going to look like, you're not alone. 8% is probably not the real number. Remember the survey bias that we talked about. There's another handful of people, a large number of people, who haven't even given it a thought. So by sitting here thinking about today, you're ahead of many people. There's a lot happening in the world right now. Things like inflation have a tendency to make us quite nervous about what our future looks like. There's a lot of noise in politics, which give us an added pause in what our retirement might look like. And I want to help you. So if you have not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. Make sure you click subscribe and notifications down below. I post 1 to 2 videos a week, usually 2, and I'd love to see you see me in the future. This is Jeff Schmidt. Thanks for watching.